Hello, everyone. Welcome to Connections with Shawnta Jackson. Connections is our opportunity as professionals to make the most out of professional networking, career advancement, career growth, and also business growth via unscripted, unedited live chats with like-minded individuals who inform and inspire. You are watching live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you so much for joining. Please do enter your questions and comments in the chat box. And if you don't have a question or comment, just simply check in to say hello and let us know which city you are viewing from. Today's guest is Dr. John Brothers. John is the president of T. Rowe Price Foundation and T. Rowe Price Charitable. And today I'd like to focus our conversation on his organization's philanthropic strategy, as well as any opportunities for organizations in local communities that that T. Rowe Price Foundation or T. Rowe Price Charitable are offering or may have coming up in the pipeline. And then also his personal leadership, personal leadership style. I'm interested to learn, just his personal philosophy and what he feels makes a good leader and whatever else comes out of the conversation. So again, everyone, thanks for joining. I am Shawnta Jackson. You are watching live, and please do enter your questions and comments in the chat box. And at this time, I will bring on Dr. John Brothers. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Shawnta. I'm excited about this.
Yes, I'm very excited as well. I did have the opportunity to interview Franklin Baker. He is the president and CEO of United Way of Central Maryland. And so you're the second big name, big organization. And I'm just interested to just take a dive in leadership first. So we will talk a little bit about T. Rowe Price Foundation, T. Rowe Price Charitable. But first, I want the audience to have the opportunity to know a little bit about you. And we were backstage and we were chatting, and you were telling me that you grew up in Minnesota, and then you moved to New York, where you had a lot of professional experience, including entrepreneurship. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was first, thank you so much for having me. It's following Franklin, who is an amazing leader in the city of Baltimore, is always going to be hard, so I'll try to do my best. So I grew up in Minnesota, and in Minnesota, I look at my career in three phases. So the first phase was largely my work around grassroots. And so in Minnesota, I served as a community organizer. I worked as a case manager. I largely worked in communities where we were helping those, I grew up in poverty, and so helping my fellow neighbors get to better places. And so that was the first part of my career. Ultimately, when I got done as an undergrad, I moved to New York City. And that began kind of the second phase of my career, which was kind of moving from the service delivery side, where I was working directly with people, to now thinking about programs, thinking about organizations. And ultimately, in New York, I became what you call a pracademic, which is what the term was. But I was somebody who could do the work. I was had a consulting firm that I had for over 15 years that grew pretty large. Large for me, at least. We had at one time, over 75 folks that were working in engagements for us, and we had efforts going on all around the world. But I also was a professor, and so I was a professor at NYU and at Rutgers in social policy and in nonprofit management. And so I both did the work and then studied the work. And that was awesome. But ultimately, I traveled like 250 days of the year, and I have an amazing wife and two amazing kids. And it's hard to be a really great father and great husband in that kind of environment. So ultimately, we had a number of folks that were interested in partnering with our firm, and we merged with a really great longtime partner. And I was able to kind of get into the third phase, which brought me to Baltimore in the philanthropic world. And so that's kind of the nickel tour of my progression to where I am today.
So you mentioned that you started off doing grassroots work in Minnesota. Do you think that you were a naturally born leader, or do you think that you were molded to be a leader?
So I think a couple of things. So I think I've taken different trajectories as a leader. I certainly have found, as a consultant, number one, that like my people want to hear often what I might have to say about a particular issue or whatever the case may be. And so that's the leadership of offering feedback and advice and helping lead people to the right place. I've certainly learned as an organizer or as a community member that the biggest power that I had at that time was being a good listener, and being able to kind of truly understand kind of the community vibrations of what was of interest to them, where they wanted their self-determinations to go. And I think as now I'm in this position, I think I actually think the power of listening and being led is a leadership trait, right? The ability to kind of build coalition, to be the hub and spokes, a quiet hub and spokes oftentimes, is a really important kind of aspect of, servant leadership that I think I try to aspire to. But certainly oftentimes when I enter the room, just by the nature of the position that I'm in, because I'm in philanthropy and there is a power dynamic, often people will want to hear what I have to say first. My job within that framework is to level out our eyes so that we see each other on the same plane, and then allow folks to, because my job is to listen to them and try to figure out kind of what's the best way that myself and my team can be helpful. And so listening, I think, is the leadership trait that I spend the most of the time on.
Yes, I think that listening is important, and listening and applying what it is that you've heard, right, and putting it into practice, and working with the folks that you're listening to put that into practice. But also, I think for me, a good leadership trait, in addition to listening, is to, and you mentioned this, it's knowing when to step up and when to step back, but step up when the leadership is needed, when it's time to actually display and to model that leadership. And then also with leaders, I think it's important for us to watch our statements. And I pay attention, and I notice in a room when folks, even if it's in a team setting, when people use I statements, and they make it more about them versus the team or the organization or the community that they're working with. And so as you were speaking, those were a few things that came to mind for me.
Well, that's good. I mean, what I do know within the position that I'm in right now, that I'm supremely fortunate to be in, is that it's somewhat rare for somebody to have delivered a service on the ground level, to have received a service, right? So, both understanding what it's like to receive, food in a food line or something like that, right? So understanding that aspect, understanding organizations. So, as a consultant, I came into contact with 10,000 organizations, understanding the various dynamics. And then now on this side, trying to take all of those experiences and apply it. Going into a room full of community and neighborhood leaders who are so inspiring, but also making sure they understand that I have sat in the basements of churches and community meetings for a really long time, and making sure they understand that is actually really helpful, because they don't have to resell me on their experiences. We can get right to the idea of building community, which also, I would say that building community is also many times listening to stories and helping understand those stories.
Yes, and tell them.
Yeah, very much.
And so you are an entrepreneur, you have this firm. I believe you said you and your wife ran the organization?
Yeah, well, my wife was the bookkeeper. And so it's great. That was awesome. But also, it's sometimes difficult to work with or have your wife work for you, right? So that is an interesting dynamic, and she's awesome. But yeah, we did this together, and then slowly but surely, our firm just got bigger and bigger. We developed some products that kind of took off and exploded the firm, and all of a sudden we were this thing that was just bigger than me and my wife. It was me and my wife and lots of others. And so that was great and awesome, but also added a number of different other challenges.
So how did the transition happen? So the third phase that you mentioned, where you're at now with Rowe Price Foundation and Rowe Price Charitable, how did that happen?
Yeah, so I, within the last couple of years of my firm, had been working with lots of philanthropy. They were clients of our firm. And a lot of the work that we did with those philanthropies was help them think about how do they approach community in the right way? How do they think about evaluation and work that they're doing? And so I really liked that work. I did my doctoral work on the relationship between government and nonprofits, and so worked with a lot of government public-private partnerships and really like that engagement. And so as the firm got larger, me and my teammates, our senior leaders of the team, started to do a strategic planning session about the future of my former firm, which was called Quidoo. And they were really excited about the strategic direction that we were going in. And I was somewhat excited, right? And it wasn't because the directions weren't great, but it was because I had been there before. And so that told me that, maybe it's a good idea to start thinking about the next leg of my firm's trajectory belonging to others and handing that off. And so because I like the work in philanthropy, I had been approached by some search firms about running other foundations, mostly family foundations. And my name got to T. Rowe, and found myself kind of interviewing for this position. And I came to Baltimore 22 times. So anybody that interviews at T. Rowe for a leadership position, there's likely going to make a couple of trips to the home office. And for me, I always scheduled a day before or a day later and just hung around the city of Baltimore, walking neighborhoods. I love cities. I love neighborhoods. And I just fell in love with Baltimore, and then fell in love with T. Rowe. And so my family did as well. And so as I got offered the job, like, it just seemed very natural. And so it was an awesome kind of experience, both being onboarded, but just learning about Baltimore. It was like, dating somebody you love for the first time. You just fell in love with them and everything about them. And every day you woke up with butterflies and you wanted to learn more and more. And honestly, it still feels that way for me. And so I just know Baltimore is the best place in the world, and just have fell in love with it. And I couldn't think of a better place to experience Baltimore than within T. Rowe.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And even just the metaphor, the comparison for love and dating and relationships. And so I hope it's inspiring for the viewers, but also it gives us an insight to, just as how leaders think. Because some people, like you said, when you step into the room, they can be intimidated, or they feel like they have to sell you. Yeah. But just to show, you're showing your human side, just your vulnerable side. Just I'm a regular person just like you, but this is my gift and this is my skill and this is why I'm in this position, and this is what I do. Let's take a moment to check in the chat box, and let's see who's watching. We have Lorinda McKelvey, and she says, "Yay to Minnesota." She was born and raised in Minnesota, and she lives in Chicago, and she's in the health and human services field. And she says, "Thanks for highlighting how you as a leader create an inclusive environment, And she says, "For me, great questions." And she's interested, or she's curious to hear your strategic direction used to grow the foundation. And that's what we'll get into. And we have Jay, the coach, checking in on Facebook. And I believe Jay, I forget the city that you're in. I think it's somewhere in the Midwest. And we have Terry checking in from Baltimore. And so we'll go back to Lorinda's question about strategic direction. But if you don't mind answering Terry's question, and she would like to know if you could please speak more to practicing servant leadership in corporate marketplace. There is tension between the Western ideology of leadership to be dominant and power-driven, and servant leadership, power sharing, and humility, especially within corporate settings.
Yeah, Terry, that's a really good question. And then also to Lorinda, I was born in Chicago, Cook County Hospital, and then lived in Minneapolis for many years, and obviously miss most things about Minnesota except for the cold. I never could get used to that. But what I would say to Terry's question is, now for us at T. Rowe Price and T. Rowe Price Foundation, the how of our philanthropy is everything. The way we show up in community, the bedside manner that we have in community, we think very deeply about, right? And I think that is inherent also in T. Rowe Price culture. Most companies will say they're client focused and probably are aiming that way. T. Rowe Price, the second I felt kind of the ethos of the company, felt very naturally that the company was always was trying to do the right thing, right? And obviously, any company with lots of people are always going to make some mistakes. I think the great thing about T. Rowe is that they're a learning organization that are always trying to learn. For us on the foundation side, to Terry's question, most corporate social good could be cast as confetti style funding or confetti style giving. And that's a phrase from FSG, but it's a phrase that kind of goes with the idea that companies in communities want to be known as good citizens. And so they give a lot of different things and spread it out far and wide, but they only within community go an inch deep. And I think oftentimes communities feel that. They say, this company is nice, but I don't feel like they're a neighbor of mine, right? And for us, I came to TRO during the April 2015, during the week of the unrest. And for me, that's when those community organizing skills actually came to the forefront, because what I remembered was that it was our job in community, especially a community that was going through real challenge, to just listen. And so I sat, and at the time, no one knew who I was. I was just this dorky dude. And so I would sit in the back of, community, churches and, and community centers, and in the living rooms of residents, sometimes just listening to kind of what was important to them. And ultimately, that allowed me to really have a good understanding of what was important to those in that community. And you had a number of others that were from outside of the community who were like, well, God, the number one issue in that community must be poverty, or it must be housing or violence. And yes, to those community members, that was really important. But the number one issue that emerged from those community members were that they wanted access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Right? If you live in central West Baltimore, you had to take 2 buses to get an apple or a cucumber, right? And that's terrible. And that was a real issue to community members. And that was an area that we focused on. And it only, it wasn't like TRO were experts in that issue area, but it was the number one issue to them. And we crafted a response that built community coalition, that did a number of things on the how of philanthropy. Those communities led us. We were never up front. You never saw our name leading that. And it was always the No Boundaries Coalition or other providers doing that work, because they're the experts on the ground. And so, Terry, the reason I kind of bring up that example to your question is, yes, there were really impactful ways that we were able to be part of change in West Baltimore right after the unrest. But the bigger part of that was the way we did that work, right? We listened first. We built coalition led by folks in that community, right? We let them decide what their North Star was from a strategic standpoint. It wasn't our strategy, it was their strategy. And we were just fortunate and lucky enough to be a part of that. And we still, every day, are thankful that they allow us to come into their homes and do that work with them. And we know at any given point in time that if we don't enter that community in the right way, they could tell us not to come back. And so we value their expertise, their worldview, how they show up every day. And we're just fortunate that they allow us to be able to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that response. And and Terry's question and your response is that you've touched on strategy just naturally to Lorinda's question about strategy. And you also mentioned an acronym. You said FSG, I believe.
FSG, yeah. They're a consulting firm in Boston that has done a lot of different thinking about corporate philanthropy. And one of the phrases they have is confetti funding, which again is kind of an example of how corporations get involved in community, which is often this kind of confetti style where it's a lot of small grants, or they're volunteering in such a way that they're kind of getting involved, but often the benefit is often to the corporation because they're viewed as, hey, look at, we're a great corporate citizen. The community may get value out of that, but ultimately it's not going deep. Shawnta, if I'm going to form a relationship with you, I'm going to go deeper than just asking, what do you like to eat and, what color do you like, right? Which is kind of confetti style. My job is to get to know you and get to know like what's really important to you. And I can't do that if I do it in a confetti style way.
And sometimes it's not asked. There are, I think, in the world of corporate social responsibility and philanthropy, I think a lot of organizations are getting it, and they're using more community-led, community-driven, participatory approaches. However, I still think that there are a lot of organizations, for whatever various reasons, they're not. And so even just their advisors, I understand that sometimes there are advisor consulting groups that kind of advise them on things to invest in. And a lot of nonprofit, when it comes to grant making, a lot of nonprofit organizations feel like they have to tailor their programming, their services to the grant request, to the grant requirement.
Right.
And so they're kind of being forced, in order to get this funding, to change their strategy, which is not something that they originally invested in or intended to do, but they need the money to do it. And so, yeah, and so I think that right there affects the, impact and outcomes, and then and just organizations overall. And I think that's where we have a lot of disarray.
Yeah, Shawnta, we practice and are kind of, at least in the corporate sector, pioneers of this thinking called trust-based philanthropy, and it relates to a lot of what you brought up. And so one of the areas, for example, is, we shouldn't tell community on how to spend their money. If we believe community organizations are doing really good jobs, which the organizations that we're fortunate enough to partner with, we do, it's not our job to get in the mix and tell them how they spend it. We just want them to continue to do the great work. And so we only provide general operating support. We are moving to almost all of our folks being multi-year givers, because you can't fund innovation and great work year to year, right? And a number of other practices. But from an evaluation standpoint, which is really one of the areas that you highlighted, we want community to dictate where they're watching or moving towards from a data perspective, right? Not, 70% of nonprofits are small mom and pops, just like our businesses, right? They don't have research and development shops. They don't have researchers, right? And often most of them are counting things because they believe that that's what we want as funders. And I think it's our job to build the strength of local organizations to determine what their North Star is and evaluate to their ability. We want a community of learners, strong learners who are reading data for their own set, not for my set. If I walked in your home and said, step on this scale, and whatever was on the weight was only the value was mine, you should tell me to get out of your home, right? It's your value. You determine your health. You determine where you're going to go. And the same thing holds true for nonprofits in the way they evaluate themselves, or a variety of other ways. And so that's why we're a really strong practitioner of trust-based philanthropy. And we think you shouldn't go into communities and start doing work unless you've built that trust. And the processes and the way you do that work is as important as the money that you give.
Perfect. Thank you. And you also mentioned the unrest. So for those of you who are not local to the Baltimore area and who are unfamiliar, and when John speaks of unrest, he's speaking of the community's response to the death of a young man in 2015 by the name of Freddie Gray. And it wasn't just necessarily about Freddie Gray, but a buildup of different things. But that was like the ultimate, the trigger point, the response that started the unrest in Baltimore, which prompted a lot of involvement from corporations, government, nonprofit, philanthropy into West Baltimore. And so in 2015, I did have the opportunity to watch your promo clip that you all did. And you already mentioned in response to Terry's question, you talked about fresh food. But then at that time, the other two needs that you decided to focus on were building financial capabilities and strengthening community leaders. And fast forward, your strategy is more focused on youth empowerment, creativity and innovation, and then financial well-being. Could you tell us a little bit how that shift changed, and talk about present day, your strategy, and what it is that T. Rowe Price Foundation and T. Rowe Price Charitable are doing? Yeah, so we have long had the kind of buckets of youth opportunity, financial well-being, and arts and innovation. Those have been buckets of ours, and we've always given in those spaces. But what we've also created, and that's what we call our citizenship bucket. But we also have these impact funds. And what we did in 2015 is to create, at the time, the largest gift that T. Rowe Price had ever given in these impact funds that centered on very specific areas that the community had said is important to them. And now we've done a couple of impact buckets since then. So we do both. So the strategy has been to do good citizenship funding, go deep on that. We call it effective citizenship, but then also these impact buckets.
And then, when we saw the strong leaders in West Baltimore, that has continued on in a capacity building program that we have that serves now over 1,000 organizations, both nationally, but mostly in the region, because we believe that if communities don't have strong organizations, we're just not going to be able to do the things that we need to do. And so we've continued on with a number of those works, but then expanded in some other areas. I think the learnings that we had in 2015 in developing the how of our philanthropy, I think is held true for us now. We, again, really think about not only how philanthropy can enter community, but also how do you have an amazing global company who's headquartered in Baltimore? How do you use all the nooks and crannies of a great company to benefit the communities that we're lucky to be partnering with? And that model has actually been right after the murder of George Floyd, we had over 20 companies in Minneapolis reach out to us and ask us, like, hey, we heard about what happened with your company in 2015, and we want to have authentic relationships in our community. And I think our answer to that was, well, you just can't do that, right? We have to address kind of, number one, the damage that you and others may have done in community. But number two, what is the way for you to develop relationships at the local level, especially in a community that's really struggling? And then how do you continue with that understanding to develop relationships and kind of meet community to where they are as compared to where you are as a company? And so I think what we're happy with is that the work we did in 2015 has held true to continue to allow us to do work at the community level. But then we've been able to influence and have connection to companies all around the globe to try to help them think about how do they develop relationships with their local community in a much deeper and more authentic way.
And what are some current or upcoming opportunities for communities and organizations to collaborate or maybe receive support from T. Rowe Price Foundation and T. Rowe Price Charitable?
Yeah, for sure. So, and T. Rowe Price Charitable, just as a understanding, is a donor advised fund, and so donor advised funds within the nonprofit world are the fastest growing section of philanthropy, and it is essentially T. Rowe Price Charitable. We have around 3,000 account holders and around $500 million of their assets to be able that they work with us on and giving out at the local community level. And so that's one effort that I'm lucky to be involved with. And then the foundation, which is the company's philanthropic arm to do work in places where we have associates and offices around the globe. And so what I would say is there's a number of ways for us to partner with community, right? There's certainly financially, we support communities both in our direct giving, but also we have one of the most generous matching gift programs around. And we're really excited when our associates who love to get their fingernails dirty at the community level, that we can support them by giving to the causes that they believe in. But then also, we do a lot of different types of giving, from capital giving to helping partnerships form to a variety of things. But we are also really proud of the initiatives that we've been able to partner with community on. So in Baltimore, for example, we have an initiative called Baltimore One Book, which is essentially a partnership with frontline community-based organizations and larger institutions like the Pratt Library. And essentially our job is to work to make sure that the 15,000 middle school students in Baltimore each year are reading the same book. And then a book about a community issue that young people care about, and then helping them start community dialogues, actions, and discussions. And this is now the 4th year that we've been doing this. And for the first 3 years, the young people have chosen books around peace and nonviolence, and then gone and started hundreds of engagements in their own community about how can they cut off and stop violence in their own communities and promote peace. That's an initiative that we helped form, and we're really proud of it. And there's at least a dozen other kind of community collaborations that we have formed. Many of them focused on racial equity and racial justice. The last one, and then I'll stop, is an effort called the Elevation Awards, which is when we were sitting in the living rooms of residents in West Baltimore, we had a number of residents say, I have ideas on how to do things in my own community. I don't need someone from the outside to come in, but what I do need is financial capital, and I need social capital to help me take my idea to the next level. And so we decided to start Elevation Awards with Baltimore Core, and right now that seeds now nearing probably over 75 fellows to this point, with funding and mentoring and coaching to help take an early stage idea and take it to the next level. Some of the fellows now have gone on to win national awards which we're really proud of. And so that's another way that we have kind of come together. And then there's so many others.
And so for folks to learn more on how to be involved, and I know you mentioned a lot, because I know T. Rowe Price Foundation and T. Rowe Price are headquartered in Baltimore, but just for clarification for the viewers, you do work, the foundation does work with other cities.
We do, yeah. We're largely where we have offices, so New York, Colorado Springs, San Francisco, things like that. The largest chunk of our work is in Baltimore, where most of our employees are. But also during the pandemic, our capacity building program is open to anybody, and we have lots of organizations around the country take advantage of our capacity building program. That's training on everything from evaluating to governance, but also to areas like race-conscious parenting and teaching, and how to view community as assets, and a number of other efforts. We have assessment tools and things like that. Organizations that can take advantage of our capacity building program, that's worth thousands of dollars, and organizations can get that for free. And we know that most nonprofits don't have money for professional development, and so we're happy to offer that up to organizations who are looking to advance both themselves, but also their organizations in whole. So there's a variety of ways for us to help. We believe in using our social capital, and so if there's a connection that you're looking to make, we're happy to do it. Ping me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you and figure out ways that we can connect you if we can't do something for you directly.
Yes, everyone, please do contact or connect with John Brothers on LinkedIn, Dr. John Brothers. And for those of you who subscribe to my mailing list, you should have received an email with his link, with his information. And please do, if you are not already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do connect with me, and that is my screen name, Shawnta Jackson, MPH. But just don't connect, respond, engage, communicate. Let me know, give me feedback on the show, ask me questions, let me know how we could possibly serve as a resource to each other. And that's the point of LinkedIn. It's not just to connect, just to have the number of connections. It's to make meaning of these connections, and that's what the purpose of this show. And John, I thank you so much for your time. I think I have one final question. Sure. Are there any, because I know some folks are, again, it's career advancement as well. So are there any current employment opportunities available with T. Rowe Price Foundation?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us at the foundation, we are going through a formal strategic planning process that will ultimately dictate kind of what our roster will be. But also at the firm, T. Rowe Price, there's a career section at T. Rowe Price that's always available. But also if folks are kind of mulling through kind of what they want to do from a career perspective, and we're obviously, I'm happy to kind of to seek advice or answer any questions or things like that. But as we start to potentially have roles, troweprice.com's career section is the best place to stay updated on that area.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Jay, the coach, I was asking her what city she was checking in from, and she's in Greenbelt, Maryland, in Prince George's County. And Terry wants to know, where can she learn more about the approach for trust-based philanthropy? Do you have any recommendations for any resources or books?
Yeah. So there's a national organization called the Trust-Based Philanthropy Institute. If you just Google that, I think it's trustbased.philanthropy.org. That's a really good place. Lots of good resources, finding out practitioners. We have a profile on that page. So, but also we're happy to send you anything if you want to go deeper, at least on trust-based and the corporate side.
Okay, perfect. And if you do connect with John on LinkedIn, please let him know that you connected through Shawnta Jackson. Again, thank you everyone for watching. We really appreciate you. And you can tune in on every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we do stream live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. I appreciate your comments, your questions, and even your follow-up. A lot of folks chime in later on the instant replay. And so I look forward to seeing you on next Wednesday. And please know that Connections, the event series, the in-person events, will be coming soon, starting this fall. The first one will be in the DMV area and probably at the end of September. So I'll keep you all posted. So please do subscribe to my email list. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.